Ski, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in and start doing videos really quick. This video is a pretty fast one. I'm just going to introduce you to the concept of what Markdown is really quick. We talked about basic Markdown the other day. We've talked about Pandoc Markdown a little bit. I still need to do a video about Pandoc Lite Markdown, which will come after this, probably today. But it's super important that I still talk to you about what Markdown is and why you care. I've talked about this on the stream a lot, but I haven't made a YouTube video about it yet, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I mentioned it in in the basic Markdown video. So the first question is like, what is it, right? So, and why do you care? Markdown is the way that you write stuff on the internet. In fact, it's pretty much the standard for all knowledge source worldwide, and it is because it's got a little bit of a structure to it. I'm going to go ahead and introduce it. If you can go look at it on the website, you could go find, Daring Fireball, which is the original place to get Markdown. And I mean, it's really not worth reading, to tell you the truth. It's changed so much since then. Just a standard search will definitely pull up Daring Fireball. There it is. This is John Gruber made this. He is a pretty interesting guy. He's more of a podcaster and a writer. And bottom line, he created Markdown because he needed something that was more maintainable and easier to write than HTML. And we actually have talked about that in other videos. But and it won. He wrote a little Perl script, and he didn't really specify it very much. He did go through the basics. This site has probably got so many hits at this point. But many things have changed. So, for example, when he originally made Markdown, he anticipated it being it was made in a time when, people were looking at text files a lot more, and artistic expression in the text file, hey, hi from Spain, was more important than anything else. So basically that allowed for a lot of conflicting ways to do things, non-consistent ways to do things. And as you'll hear me talk about in the basic Markdown sort of boost video, that's bad. It's bad to have lots of ways to do things when you're talking about any kind of syntax. You want to have one consistent way to do things, even if that means being restricted a little bit in your artistic expression. And why? Because you want to be able to grep those headers out. You want to be able to get them and that stuff. So one specific example of that is here we have a header that you can do a nice pretty underline, and it looks really great as source code, but try to find those things with just a simple tool like grep. Impossible. So don't do it. Do this. Use these ATX style headers and not the setx headers. And if you want to know all the details about all those differences, that is what the basic Markdown video is all about. It goes really in depth into why you shouldn't do certain things one way and you should think about doing things another way, so that you have consistency in it. It's based on a lot of experience from many, many years of writing in Markdown. But let's go back to why you would care. The main reason you might want to care is because you might want to write for you want to write for services like Reddit or Stack Exchange or there's so many others right these days. Discord even accepts it, and you can write it and maintain. So this website itself is done in Markdown. That's what this is. This is all Markdown, MX Markdown mode. So this is all Markdown. So Markdown is the universal syntax for knowledge source, and I'm going to stick with that. It allows you to manage. It's like writing source code for knowledge. Now, why do you care about that? Because you want to maintain your knowledge in a way that's going to be sustainable. That means word processors come and go. Web frameworks, God knows, they come and go. So, but your knowledge isn't going to change, and you want your knowledge will change over time. And that's a different problem, by the way. If you want to talk about how to create sustainable knowledge that expires and stuff, you might want to watch me on some of my other streams. I am obsessed with creating a README world where we can maintain our own personal knowledge bases and share them in a way that automatically prompts you for updating it and expires data, so you don't get old data out there forever. But that's a personal passion of mine. But if you want to really care about what you're doing for you, you're making notes for college or something, just write them this way. Why Markdown? Well, because Markdown can grow with you all the way. It can start out as something very basic that works with Discord only, Reddit, and then it can grow with you, and it can actually take in complex mathematical notation or anything like that, all using standards that have been established and used for more than 20 years. So this is a phenomenal way to capture your knowledge. Okay, but along those lines, so the next question you're going to have as soon as you make the decision to do Markdown and you start playing around with it is how to do that. Well, there's another video about how to write Markdown and basic Markdown. That's how you should start. There's another video about Pandoc Lite Markdown, which is how to grow. And there'll be another video about actually about editors and plugins. This is usually the biggest challenge for most people when they start to do this. A lot of them are not programmers, and even though Markdown was a language that was created by writers specifically for non-programmers, it still requires a text editor, and that lowest common denominator kind of idea is really great. If you have text edit, you can edit the stuff in text edit. You can use web editors like GitLab. You can use any number of online editors to do it. But what about all those people who are writing in Microsoft Word docs or Google Docs? What can they do, right? Well, they can start to, Emacs has Markdown mode. Yes, it does. There's lots of Markdown modes. You should not use Emacs, by the way, as your first editor. We'll make a case for that later. I don't want to talk about it right now. Emacs is a fantastic editor if you never want to leave your computer, if you're just using that one computer. But Google Docs, what do you do with that, right? Well, thankfully, things like Google Docs and Microsoft Word can be converted to Markdown so that you can have your teams build and write out content in that if that's the only thing they know. But in the editor's video, you'll see that there's lots of other ways to do that look like that. So Typora, for example, looks a lot like Microsoft Word. So if you're a novelist or something and you want to write, and which people do, there's been lots of novels and textbooks written in Markdown because of its just absolute power and ubiquity in the way of maintaining it. You also want to make sure that your source code for your knowledge, the writing, the knowledge source, is searchable. It can be processed. The words can be counted. All of those things are extra add-ons in whatever word processor is out there. But those word processors, even the open ones like LibreOffice, are really, really complex. And the source, the XML code underneath it, is nothing that you would ever be able to maintain or use or keep around for any amount of time. But the good thing is that those formats can be converted over into Markdown so that you can sort of start factoring out your knowledge and managing that way. It's a completely separate video for me to talk about how to organize your knowledge. And that, frankly, that is a really tough topic. Do you make one big massive document? Do you make a lot of little tiny documents and articles? How do you manage your knowledge? And the one answer to that, the quick answer that I'll give you is treat your knowledge like source code. And if you're not a programmer, you won't know what that means. But if you are a programmer, you know exactly what I mean. That means that when you have a file that's too big, that's more than 3 screens long, you refactor that code and you put it into someplace else and then you import it in. And so when you import it in, another huge advantage of Markdown is consistency and precise formatting. Adding images and word processes within a body of text sucks. Yes, you don't even know what kind of styling you're going to get. But when you're maintaining your knowledge this way, you're able to apply the rendering and the styles and the formats later. So you want a PDF? Great. Read an independent PDF. In a different video, I will talk at some point about organizing your knowledge in such a way that if one piece of your knowledge becomes out of date or wrong, it doesn't affect all of it. And basically looking at knowledge as source code, thinking like a programmer about how you factor and manage your knowledge source. And frankly, it's amazing how many best practices and really complex problems have been solved by software development. And those solutions directly apply to managing knowledge, because knowledge is just source code. Human brains are just computer devices, sort of, and they just have a different method of being programmed. But, honestly, education is the science and practice of programming the human brain. And how do you put code into the human brain? Well, you write it. You write it in knowledge source. The knowledge source is Markdown, as far as I'm concerned. So that's the reason to use Markdown. We talked about the different ways to use Markdown. I do want to talk really briefly about the different types of Markdown. I don't want to get into the weeds on this. This is one of the things that people get really lost on really fast because Markdown was so successful and it also suffered from massive, fast growth. Everybody decided to throw in their own 2 cents about how things should be done, and that's fantastic. You want things to do like that. But there was never a guided specification, and so you get really crazy additions that are bad, frankly, that you never want to use, and then other things that you do. And thank God, I'm going to give him credit. JGM John from the Common Mark project. This is the guy who created a tool called Pandoc, which you're going to see me use extensively. Pandoc is the universal document conversion tool. It will literally translate from hundreds of other formats to hundreds of other formats and so on. And it can be extended with Lua. It's a fantastic tool. I think it's probably the most important piece of software for knowledge management, period. And it's not known by a lot of people, unfortunately. So anyway, we'll talk about that and why I think it's superior, particularly when we talk about Pandoc Lite Markdown, which is be its own video. So stay tuned for that video. But here we go. So here's Markdown is a simple markup language. You can read the definition here. This is actually written in Markdown. So we have 3 basic types. These are my types. So my sort of categorizations. But you know, they overlap with some of the ways that other people look at things. The first way is basic Markdown. I call it basic Markdown. I've called it many things in the past. I've called it Easy Mark. I've called it Base ML. I mean, I've called it so many different things. But what it really is it's Markdown in its most basic form. That means, yes, you can do, you know, emphasis with stars or underscores. Just pick one. In that case, use a star, right? Don't have lots of different ways of doing things because you'll have a lot of hard time. You have the cognitive overhead already of deciding which one you're going to use. It's harder to teach other people, which I already know because I've taught 9-year-olds how to do this. But, you know, but also beyond that, you won't be able to consistently look for these things inside of your code, whether you're searching by hand or you want to write a little script that tries to find all the emphasis, right? Or all the underlines. If you do too much artistic expression, you get in trouble. So I make that big case when I talk about basic Markdown, but I'm repeating it more than necessary now because it's so important. It is so important that you learn to just limit yourself. You don't need extra stuff. And there's one thing we do in technology. It is create lots of unnecessary extra stuff. We over-engineer everything. I think HTML itself was over-engineering. We know that because Markdown emerged later because it was produced by writers who weren't engineers, and they did a really great job of that. So anyway, basic Markdown, learn it. It's simple. You can learn it in 20, 30 minutes. You can start writing in it immediately with any text editor that you want. But I do have a video on different text editors. I personally, of course, I use Vim on the terminal, which I think everybody should learn as a technologist, but that's maybe not in your power right now. So you can, you know, use VS Code or whatever. And okay, next, Common Mark. So Common Mark, we're not going to talk about, I have a listing to it here, but I'll never make a video on it because there's really no need. Common Mark is the output of the effort of JGM, who created Pandoc. He rallied the troops. He got GitHub and GitLab and Reddit and everybody to come together and say, let's do this. What is standard here? Because everybody was doing their own thing. In fact, GitHub's Markdown is standardized now. It's actually called GFM, GitHub Flavored Markdown. And there's some disastrously bad things in it. I mean, they're so bad. They're so poorly designed. Tables specifically. And then there's like some really amazing things that they brought, like code fences and stuff. And so, you know, JGM kind of took it up. And if you want to read all about this, by the way, you can go join the Pandoc mailing list, where, I mean, they're still old school, you know, and they use, believe it or not, mailing lists are still a thing. Not everybody uses Reddit, you know. There's still a lot of people who use, really important people who use mailing lists. You might want to look for that if you want to follow that. So the Common Mark effort is still ongoing. In fact, I think they're about to vote on whether attributes should be added to Common Mark. Oh my God, I hope they are. They're so cool. You'll see me using them all over the place, and I'm going to talk about them in the Pandoc Lite Markdown video, but you're going to have to wait till then to hear me talk about them. So the third thing is Pandoc itself. And so Pandoc is an application, but it has also been used by many academics to make primarily academic writing. And so it has grown into this extremely powerful, hands down, the most powerful Markdown on the planet. In fact, it's the only, as far as I know, it's the first Markdown and continues to be the most substantial Markdown that allows you to use math notation. That's LaTeX, LaTeX. And if you don't know what that is, you probably read a book that was written in LaTeX by somebody who had to learn it in order to make the book. Generally, textbooks are written in this standardized typefacing language, primarily for producing books, but not always just that. And so math notation has taken on LaTeX as the standard syntax for math. Obviously, you can't write complex mathematical notation And yeah, if you're wrestling with LaTeX, you don't want that unless you need it, right? But I tell you what, if you want it, when you need it, you really need it. Because how do you represent complex scientific notation with text? I mean, really, how do you do that? So thankfully, I think is it Bluth? What's his name? Kuth. I forget. It's Donald. I think it's Donald. I forget his name, but the guy who invented LaTeX is an academic who's a really amazing human being, a fun personality for you to study, by the way. But anyway, so here you go. There's also, there's now music notation. Thank God, Donald Knuth. Yes, I'm pretty sure that's him. So he invented this way of capturing any typographical sorts of thing, and so as knowledge has to be captured, there has to become a text-based syntax to capture that. Otherwise, it can't go into a file. I mean, it's fine to have binary stuff, right? But how do you represent that? How do you save that for posterity as a file? So math notation has come to be captured in LaTeX, which Pandoc fully supports. There's another thing called MathJax. It's just an extension of all of that. So again, I'm making the case for why use Pandoc. Pandoc provides the maximum power and flexibility. And I'm not talking about just a tool. I'm talking about what's Pandoc Markdown. So Pandoc Markdown is specifically JGM's initiative. So we're talking about the guy who brought everybody to the table and then has also made his own for his own purposes. As last time I checked, he was still a philosophy professor. So he's using this. This is what's so great. He actually created a tool to solve a need that he had. Every time that ever happens, it's always better. Scratch your own itch, right? So, and this is a fantastic tool. It is so good. And something as simple as this. So let me give you an example. This thing you're reading right here, this is a table. And if you know about GitHub flavored Markdown, you know already that this is much, much simpler. All it does is have a line break in between here, and it uses the position of the text inside of those lines to establish how it's going to be outlined. This right here, this is not common for other. This is called what's called a div, which is a divider. It's not like an HTML div, even though it becomes a div. And this is a way to do a call out or to separate a bit of text from the rest of the text. These are headers, etc. So you start out by learning, taking 20 minutes to learn basic Markdown, and then always use that everywhere. And then again, I am such a big harper on this particular point. Progressive enhancement. Say it with me. Progressive enhancement. Progressive enhancement means using the minimum necessary technology and complexity to get the job done. And then as more things are required or enabled or available, you add on as you go. But you design and code and engineer for the minimum and then build progressively. That is what progressive web apps are. That's what the progressive doesn't mean that somebody's progressive in their thinking. It means that it's a web app that works with a text-based browser and progressively enables and allows things as it detects other functionality in a web browser. That's what progressive means. The progressive enhancement approach should be the way you look at everything that you make in life, because that's the best way to standardize. If you don't need all the crazy regular expressions and silly things in a shell script, maybe you want to write a POSIX shell script. But as soon as you do, you might want to reach for Bash or even Perl or Python if it needs to have really high-end, thousands of lines of class-based object programming. Then you progressively enhance based on your needs. Don't use more than you need. And it's a big problem in our world, and it's particularly rampant in the technology world because we love to over-engineer things, and we love to create abstraction fly strips, which is Brian Cantrell's term. I love it. Okay, so here we go. So we start out with basic Markdown. You progressively decide, okay, by the way, basic Markdown is common Markdown, and common Markdown is Pandoc Markdown. So they progressively are compatible with each other. Camera sharpness going strong. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, so here you go. We've got a lot of different ways of looking at this, and this is the Markdown that you can go ahead and look at, and you can give that a shot as you go. If that is not what you want to do, if you want to stick with restructured text, that's fine. It's your choice. You're the boss of you. But I'm telling you that this is by far the standard. So now you know what Markdown is, why you want to use it, and you know maybe about progressively enhancing your Markdown and using more, like if you need math, right, you have to use Pandoc. There's no other way. So you know, and how to add those things on. Hopefully this has been a good introduction to Markdown and what to use and how to go about learning the next thing. If you want to know what to learn next, go learn about basic Markdown and go learn about Markdown editors. And those are two separate videos you can find here. Thanks. And Mark.